And it's been a typical summer here. It's rained every day just about for the last 2 weeks. So I'm sitting in the van and it's pouring with rain. But just thanks to breakthroughs in technology, I have access to the internet and I have access to lots of archives. And I've also got access to a paper archive here. So that at least that keeps me amused instead of going down to the beach and building some castles. Today I'm going to talk about Putin. I've done this before on a number of occasions, but I thought I could do something today on the origins of Putin. If you want to ask anything or start some line of conversation up, then please do so. I usually respond to it once I've sort of the questions when I've finished, but sometimes I might just stop and then respond to it. So see how it goes. So I do this without notes anyway. Right. So Putin. I had a thought today, actually, rather than the origins of Putin, it would be an interesting subject to actually deal with. How did he end up with from somebody as he was in 2000 to where he is today? And but that I think is more for people who know about psychology rather than myself. Putin comes from a very poor family, a very poor background. His grandfather, I did a video on his grandfather, published it about March of last year or thereabouts, and he comes from the area of Tver. Tver is between Moscow and Petersburg, and he comes from a small village called Pominovo. And the grandfather, Spiridon, on his father's side, he went to an inn at a very young age, probably 10 or 12 years old. And what I suspect happened was that the inn said they needed somebody. The family was poor. Well, take this boy. He can do the washing, he can clean the vegetables, and he can do all the rest of it. But he became a cook and he worked his way up. So by the First World War, just before it, he was already working in top class restaurants. So there he was. So he's 35 years old when the war broke out. He must have done really well for himself. So he must have been pretty good. Now, the First World War was disastrous for many countries, but it was above all, more than anywhere else, I'd have to say that it was disastrous for Russia or the Russian Empire as such. From now, the problem is that when we often talk about what the communists did, we see this terrible evil of communism, and we don't think though how it was created and where it comes from. And the Tsarist regime, which was pretty nasty, but because the communist regime and all the things that Stalin did was so much worse, we seem to think that the Tsarist regime was quite nice. It was all good fun and everybody was treated nicely. It wasn't. The Tsarist regime was a terrible, oppressive regime, and the thing was though what came after it. So you have the war. What wars do is they dislocate things completely. So if you've got somebody who's working in a field somewhere, and that person is doing whatever they have to do in the field, he's producing potatoes or wheat of some type or something else to eat. That person then has to go to war. Is no longer producing the potatoes or doing whatever has to be done on the farm. So you've got dislocation. Now let's suppose that somebody else manages to do it, but because the war then dislocates the transport, the long shot of it is that people in cities are not getting fed. And what happened in Russia? People weren't getting fed, so they went on strike to get food. And so they send the army against them, and eventually the Tsar is overthrown. The same thing, curiously enough, exactly the same thing happened in the 1930s. It was the communists who thought that the peasants in the fields ought to be supplying them with food. And as they weren't getting food, they'd go and take it from them by force at gunpoint. And the result was, of course, of this caused mass starvation. But the reason why the pheasants probably weren't producing their food is because they were forced into collectivization, which dislocated them, and the cities were not producing the goods for them. The fence posts and the tractors and the spades and all the rest of it. So I mean, this is one of the reasons why communism just doesn't work. Anyway, Spiridon was still a cook, and he got a later he was cooking for Lenin, and he even cooked for Stalin. It seems to me as though he got a job in some kind of a communist old age a retirement home. Sorry, I'll use the proper word. And that's how he, for example, Lenin's widow, who died in 1939, he used to cook for her quite regularly. So that was, I would have to say, by the standards of the time, that was a pretty successful career. He worked until he was 80. He was 80 in 1959. I think it was 1965 he died. Now, he had a son, and the son was born in 1911. That's Vladimir Putin's father. And so the son, he did his military service in the submarines corps in 1933. Now, so he was there for a year in the submarine corps. In 1941, he was living in Leningrad, Petersburg, it was being renamed, and war starts out, and he was conscripted in the 78th Rifle Division. Now, I did some research on the 78th Rifle Division because I thought this was quite a curious story. On the 22nd of June 1941, this division was stationed in Poland to the north of Warsaw, but on the part that had been occupied by the Soviet Union in their attack of 1939, Chichanovets. And it was somewhere between Chichanovets and Łomża. It was completely destroyed, completely. It was not even their flags or anything like that. But this unit was recreated, and Putin's father was conscripted into it. So it was recreated around September of 1941. So that must have been when Putin's father went into it. Now, I have read somewhere that he was in the destruction battalions of the NKVD. Now, a destruction battalion, that sounds quite innocuous. It sounds like an engineering organization that goes on blowing up bridges or something like that. But it wasn't. The destruction battalions, actually, they destroyed people more than anything else. So they were the ones that stopped people trying to withdraw or whatever it was, even in absurd circumstances. But I don't think he was in that. Now, he fought in battles in the Nevsky Perechop, which was a bridgehead on the Neva River. Now, if you have a look at Petersburg on the map, you'll see to the east is Lake Ladoga, and or northeast really, and from the Neva River flows from there. And on the Germans were on the east. That's not a mistake, and the Soviets were on the west. But the Soviets, the Red Army, forced this bridgehead on the eastern bank of the Neva, and there was pretty horrific fighting going on there. Now, in Petersburg itself, Leningrad itself, there was dreadful starvation. It was cut off completely, and until such times as an ice road was built across the Lake Ladoga, there was no way of getting in supplies. Now, we have here, just to make a political comment, Stalin, whilst he was allied to Hitler, invaded Finland. But it would be an easy conquest. Well, they did push the border back in the region of Lake Ladoga, and in fact, most of the battles of the Finnish War were fought in what is today Russia. So it was land that Finnish land that Russia continues to occupy. And the had this not happened, then they could have. I dare say supplies could have come in from Finland. So it's yet another way in which Stalin and Molotov's hatred and imperialism actually caused the suffering for the Russian people. Um, Now, the this bridgehead over the Neva River, fighting there on the 17th of November 1941. The father of Putin, along with one of his comrades, came across a German soldier, and the German threw a grenade. The grenade killed the comrade of the father, and the splinters, not really splinters, the casing, the something that said shrapnel, but it's not shrapnel, but the bits of metal in it injured the father. And now the father was left there for dead. Somebody who knew him from Leningrad found him and managed to save him. Otherwise, he'd have just been left there. He'd have been a goner. He was taken to a first aid point, and he was evacuated over the ice road. Meanwhile, the mother almost died of starvation herself. She collapsed in the street, and she was about to be taken away as dead when somebody recognized her. So, and sorry, not somebody recognized her. She moved, and that somebody saw she was still alive, so she didn't end up with all the other corpses. And she ended up in the hospital, and she, I think, was evacuated as well. But there were people in the Putin family. There was one person. It's not very clear what happened, but it seems as though he was accused of something and ended up getting shot or killed somehow. This could be, of course, somebody who didn't fulfill a norm in the Stalinist times. It could be that somebody who retreated. It could be that somebody who, through no fault of his own, was surrounded and then was unable to hold the front together. Whatever, we don't know. But anyway, it seems that there had been people killed. There were certainly people in Putin's family who died of starvation or died under the Nazis. For example, his mother, his grandparents on his mother's side were murdered by the Nazis. That we know. So he comes from this dreadful historical situation. Now, the father got a job in a factory which made engines. Now, after the war, they continued to live in the same place that they had lived before the war. So, except with all the deprivations and things which are not getting fixed. So they lived effectively, it was in a shared apartment, shared with another family. They've got the one gas point out in the corridor, toilets out in the corridor somewhere. And the Putin was the third child they had. The first child died, I think, of diphtheria, but it's not clear. That would be on 1940. The second son died. All sons died of starvation in Leningrad. So he was a few months old. 1942, he died, and so tragic history. So when Vladimir came along on October 1952, the parents were absolutely enthralled to have a child, and they treated him, they mollycoddled him, they were so pleased. His mother took him off along with the Jewish Kohen or the late Babka Anya, the Orthodox Jewish lady they shared the apartment with. They took him off to be christened, and many years later, whilst talking to George Bush, the second George Bush, he told how he saved. He got a crucifix for his what do you call it? What do Christians do? A christening, and then he managed to save this from a fire, and this really impressed George, as this type of thing really would. This showed something about the later Vladimir Putin, that he was always ultra prepared for interviews, and that's something we all should be. Although, as you can see, quite now, I am not. So he grew up in poverty. He told the stories about the rats that lived in the building where he was. Now, today, I'm sure this is quite an expensive area to live in, because it's bang in the center of Petersburg, Baskova, sorry, and it's there's a museum there now. It's probably a private museum, but a museum of Putin. And but at the time, it must have been pretty horrific. And mind you, there's places like this in London as well. Maybe not in 1952, but if you look at what they were like 100 years ago, and then know what they're like now, they're super expensive. You can take the places where Jack the Ripper, okay, that's 1888, admittedly, but where he was, what it was like Spitalfields in London then, and what it's like now. Or even you could say what Spitalfields was. I can remember what it was like 40 years ago, and what it's like now. So, in fact, I've got a video called the fall. Sorry, the rise and fall. No, sorry, the fall and rise of Spitalfields. But anyway, that apart. So it shows the environment he grew up in. Anyway, so he as a kid, he liked to chasing rats around. That's the sort of thing that boys would do. I'm sure I'd have done the same thing had there been any rats where I was. But one day he cornered a rat, and that rat went for him. And he's described it several times, but in slightly different stories. But the rat, he sort of then described on one occasion how it ran up a banister. So it must have, if it got up onto the banister and ran up the banister, it must have been a good jumper. Anyway, so at school he was quite a small, sickly type as well. I mean, that's to be understood with the lack of food and the way the circumstances and he was brought up in, and it was quite weak, and it would seem that there were others who sort of bullied him. And now his father suggested he learn how to box. That's the sort of thing a father would suggest. He didn't like it, but then he tried something. I think it's called samba, which is sort of a Russian or Soviet rather form of judo. So he was doing judo, and he was doing judo with other people he's still friendly with, such as the Rosenberg, Arkady Rosenberg brothers, for example, the one that built the Crimean Bridge, got a construction company. It was good to go to judo classes with Putin, because that was the way you actually, in later life, you got big contracts. He sometime probably around 17 years old or something like that, he walked into Lithuania Prospect, where the KGB had its headquarters in Leningrad, and it was said, there was a joke there, that you could see from Lithuania Prospect, you could see you could see as far as the islands where the Gulag was. Sorry, I couldn't quite do the translation there, but you could see a very long way, because you could see the entire Gulag archipelago. I need to work on that joke. Might get it right next time. And he walked into the KGB. The KGB, I think, was largely feared. And the reason he did this possibly was because there was a film that came out called The Sword and the Shield. And I think this inspired him. And I mean, lots of youngsters like this. I think I was pretty much like this as well. When if I'd seen something like that, I know I'd have wanted to join the KGB as well. And so he remembered. Years later, you still remember the song that it started off with and all the rest of it. So he went there. Now, there's two stories on this one. Either the KGB told him that look, to come back when he'd be contacted if they thought they needed him, or the second thing is that he got an interview. But he did ask, well, what do you think I should study? And they suggested that he study law. Don't know why the KGB would want anybody to study law. That's beyond me. But anyway, so that's what he did. He went to law school, And whilst he was at law school, he met somebody. One of his professors was a person called Sobchak, Anatoly Sobchak, who later became the mayor of Petersburg, and without any doubt is the person who created Vladimir Putin. But that was later. Anyway, um, in he met he met his wife at a concert. It wasn't really at the concert; it was like a double date. I think his friend wanted to take one of Ludmila's friends out, and so he got stuck with Ludmila. I think that's how it actually started. So he went to this concert, and for some reason, where apparently he wasn't very talkative, but she asked him, could he get tickets for a another event, and he said, yeah, sure, and he got the tickets, and then the two of them started going out together. Now his wife had originally wanted to be an actress. She was born in 1958, so she's 6 years younger than he was, and she came from Kaliningrad, not so far from where I'm sitting right now. And her joke was that whereas other girls used to go and meet their dates by tram, she used to take the plane. So he was totally far apart, and so it must have been quite difficult for them, bearing in mind that whereas telephones did exist, of course, but it would have been difficult to sort of actually stay in contact. Now the two of them got married in 1983. Since I'm on the subject of Ludmila, I'll just stick with her for the moment. The marriage, well, Ludmila now is incredibly wealthy. I'm sure it's all due to her talents, but according to an interview which was published in Germany in the 90s, based on interviews with people, he used to beat her. Now, this I have not come across this in any English language publication, but she felt as though he didn't treat her very well. According to this woman, so I need to point, it was a friend of hers who then spoke to the press afterwards. I mean, we know similar stories from other people in the news today, where a friend sort of goes and spills all to the police. They have got two daughters, and together. And it would seem as well that Ludmila, when he left the KGB, and when he went back to it, she was really upset about it. She didn't like this at all, and it's thought that just as when things were looking good for us and got some money in the bank, and now got to go back to the KGB. Anyway, it seems he wasn't actually loyal to her. According to a Moscow newspaper, he had a child with some student whose name was Svetlana, or is Svetlana, I think that's her name. And poor Svetlana, who gave birth to this child in 2003, she was actually put on the sanctions list by the United Kingdom government not long ago. So I don't know, but she became, I'm sure it's entirely due to her skills and her business ability, but I think she's on the management board of, I can't remember the name of the company now, but some pretty big company. She's got 2.5% of the shares, and which is worth millions. Anyway, but I'm sure she's a great manager. And he also apparently he was with another a gymnast. I need to point out that the newspaper closed immediately after this came out, only 10 days later, I should say. And I'm sure that the two things are not at all linked. Anyway, I've jumped ahead of myself. I've gone too far ahead. So come back. So he joins the KGB, and now the KGB is specifically on effectively it's on internal opposition to the communist regime. Now there is an external part as well, but the overwhelming bulk of the activity is an internal. Now, one of his friends, Roldugan, asked him when he was at school, at university, he said, what are you going to do then? You're going to become a cop? And he said, no, I'll never do that. And so he said, there was a joke, so you want to sort of persecute us. You want to keep an eye on what we're doing. And but Putin said he wouldn't do that. He wasn't that. He was the shield and the sword. He wanted to go off to other countries and sort of be a spy, like in in the film that he'd seen as a child. So now Putin, however, is very good at judo. Now I know he does these things which to us seem pretty ridiculous. There's macho things like fighting tigers and swimming underwater and blowing things up. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but and showing him himself in the gym and this type of thing. And you do see him doing judo. You never see him actually getting beaten, but which is a bit odd for somebody of his age. But anyway, he was good at judo. And there was one case where he got involved in a fight at a bus stop, and was and he sorted them out, the ones who were there. Now he got involved in another fight. I think was in the underground in the metro system in Leningrad, and in this case he didn't come out so good. And there are a number of films. So there's at least, last time I counted, there were 5 films saying, why has Putin got a funny walk? And the claim is in these things, he's got a funny walk because he was a KGB officer and he has to walk like that to get his gun out quickly. That's what they say. No, I think that's a complete myth, although it makes a good story. And the reason he has a funny walk was because he got involved in this fight in the underground and left him in that condition afterwards. I think that is more like, of course, your best person to ask would be a doctor who could actually answer that one better than I can. The thing is, the fight, the first time he got involved in the fight, and I don't think his superiors knew about it, but the second time they did find out. And this probably because he had his face marked and or something marked, and this would have an effect on his career. Ludmila didn't know he worked for the KGB. Now one day she asked him, he said, what do you do? And he said, well, in the morning we go fishing, and in the afternoon we let go, so we let the fish go. And she was supposed to understand from that. Eventually she did find out that what he did. Now I think probably because of this fight he was sent off to he was sent to East Germany. Now he wanted to go to East Germany, he applied for it, he needed me learning German in advance, and but he wanted to go to Berlin. I mean, what spy wouldn't want to go to Berlin? But he got sent to Dresden instead. Now here, what was his role? Well, it's the same sort of thing. It's he's keeping an eye on the opposition, liaising with the Stasi, but in a case like this, the Stasi was much more efficient than the KGB. The Stasi knew what was what. They knew what they were doing. They didn't need the KGB there. Of course, the KGB is the occupying power. The Soviet Union, in fact, was the occupying powers of East Germany until the end. Then he was there, so he wasn't really sort of a courtesy. He was there as the occupant. Now, he did come up with a couple of schemes. Now, one of his schemes was that NATO bases, he wanted to allow people to leave East Germany who are relatives near these NATO bases, obviously leaving some hostages at home in East Germany, and then to send him information. So he tried this out, but it came to nothing. Effectively, his job was cutting articles out of newspapers and sort of gluing them into a scrapbook and then sending them back to Moscow. And this was the idea of intelligence gathering. It came largely from newspaper articles about what was what and what was going on. So that was it. And he stayed in Dresden until the very end. Now, according to his story, and this has changed at various times. Now, when the wall came down, so East Germany was liberated, and there were lots of people out reveling, singing, and really happy. And anyway, now they're said to have come to where the where the Soviet delegation was in Dresden, and sort of then threatening it. Now the story comes out that he sort of came out and told them to go away, or he came out with a AK-47 and told them to go away, or something along those lines. But I've spoken to people who were there on that day. Sorry, I spoke to one person in depth about what happened on that day, and he said no, it was, there might have been a few people hanging around outside, but it was more like yeah, after you win a football match or something like that. It's not, people weren't being aggressive; they were being sort of happy. They were singing, and they're probably a bit plastered by the end of it. But this was the atmosphere. It was a party-like atmosphere, rather than let's find these commies and do them in. It wasn't like that at all. Anyway, so I might continue this story at a different day. There's some interesting characters. Yeah, I'm going to move around here, see if this makes it any better, because I seem to be rather dark. Is that any better? Oh, it's just the same, isn't it? Yeah, it's just the same. Anyway, never mind. The I'll come round the other side. Okay, well, come round here. I'll come round here. The reason I'm coming around here is because round here there's a light, and I can put the light on like that. And how's that sound? That's probably better now, isn't it? Right. I like to sit in the front, so you've got a view out the window. And anyway, right, stick this up a bit. There we go. And yeah, fortunately it's getting darker now, but I do like to sit behind with a window rather than a MPPT controller for solar panels on behind me. So I think there's a number of characters I find really interesting. Actually, the first one is Sobchak, Anatoly Sobchak, who was the law professor, and he was the person who molded. He was the Putin. He was the what do you call it in English? Mayor of Petersburg, and whilst Putin was the deputy, and he died in 2000, but his story is really very from being somebody a hardcore Democrat, a person who really wanted to change the system, possibly ending up in all sorts of corruption and theft. I mean, without a doubt, Putin himself was involved in the theft in Petersburg of donations which were made from abroad to stop people starving there, and his daughter. No, but there's photographs actually. Putin was utterly loyal to Sobchak. When Sobchak had legal problems, everybody else abandoned him except for Putin. And Putin stood beside him. And this loyalty was rewarded by Yeltsin when Putin became prime minister in 1999. Yeltsin, who was seeking protection from what he'd done, from the money that had gone missing. And that was why Putin, who showed himself by being head of the FSB, the way that he'd attacked the prosecutors who were investigating crimes committed financial crimes committed by the Yeltsin family, and it was for these reasons that Yeltsin knew that Putin would protect him. So also with Yeltsin, what a tragedy! What a great figure in the fight against communism. Then he ends up being a major thief. Anyway, that apart. Now, Sobchak's daughter Ksenia is a opposition person now, and the reason I think that she didn't start to have problems until quite recently was because of her. Because Putin tried to protect families. There's a photograph actually at Anatoly Sobchak's funeral. He died in 2000. He was only 62 at the time, and there's a photograph with him and his wife Lyudmila, with Sobchak's wife, who's still, I think, a member of the Duma. She is, because she voted against the mobilization, and Ksenia, the daughter. And you can see in the photograph, you can really feel the pain and the togetherness of it. And which is the irony of it now. And Ksenia fled to Lithuania last year. I don't know where she is now, but I mean she's also mega rich. But I think she's mega rich in her own right. I mean, in this case, I genuinely mean her. The other times I was being sarcastic, but she was from a television personality. Anyway, look, we'll do that in some other time. I'm coming off to the subject, so let's have a look at the questions. So, hello, Janet, and hello, Brian. How am I? Well, yeah, I'm not well. I'm perfectly okay. I've twisted my foot, and it's quite painful. Anyway, but I can cycle though without any problems. So thanks, Mad. Thanks, Mike. The learning. Hello, Noel, and yeah. Yeah. So Brian says, history lesson: bigger an empire gets, the closer it gets to collapse. Yeah. Well, yeah. I think there's a lot of truth. There's a lot of truth about that, and I remember something once watching a program about the Byzantine Empire, and there was Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, and he started off sort of building it, rebuilding it. Sorry, because the Byzantine just corrupt, but then. He got it to stage and then just started falling to pieces again. But I think the problem with empire is that if the people in that empire don't want to be in it, then there is a major problem. And what I can say of the European empires, this is a theory I've had for 40 odd years, is that the West, France, Britain, above all France and Britain, gave the imperial lark up because it cost too much money, and it's only after getting rid of these empires that they started to actually have some funds of their own. And it could be that, I don't know if we could say that about the Russian Empire, because Russia is the only European country that hasn't decolonized. I mean, the last Portugal decolonized in 1975. That was the last, and Russia continues to hold a large part of the empire it conquered in the 18th century. Now, if that people are happy being part of that empire, I mean, great, well done. I don't have no problem with that. But if they're not, then that does tend to lead to problems, as we have seen, for example, in Chechnya. Anyway, right. So, can we undo the geography imposed by Stalin? Asked Christopher. No, we can't. The reason we can't do it, because the geography imposed by Stalin was also imposed by what we call ethnic cleansing. I hate words like that when we're talking about murder. Okay, ethnic cleansing may not necessarily be just murder. It may be deportation. Here, where I am right now, 90 years ago, there were 360,000 people living there, and of whom approximately 1,800 spoke Polish as their first language. And today, there are nobody. Nobody. My neighbours here probably speak German, but there's next to nobody. There's very few people who speak German as their first language. The reason for that, because people were moved around. And we see large areas now, for example, where Polish people, for example, lived, and they were forced out or killed by either by Nazis or communists or others, and they were brought here, and the Germans themselves who lived in these areas were kicked out. Things now today we've got the European Union, we've all got the right to travel around as and where we like. So that's pretty positive. So let's put these things back. But I mean, when Russia, for example, if this is the problem with Putin's falsified ideas of history, he wants to take the good bits, like the empire building bit, but you just won't take the bad bits. Like, okay, well, we lost that. It only think of land. When people say that's ours, it only depends how far back in time you actually go. So this is it. So supposing if you're a British imperialist and you say you want to take a bit of France back, which large parts of what is today France was part of England, but that would mean that Scotland and would have to go, would no longer be part of that. So this is the way it works. I just used that as a rather silly example, but this is the way it is. But it just depends how far back in time you actually go. And so here we say, okay, this city here, Gdansk, and 1,000-year history was roughly half and half shared by German-speaking people and Polish-speaking people, approximately. Very, very approximately. It was an independent city-state sort of thing, but it owed its allegiance under suzerainty to the Polish king. So it depends how far back you go. Anyway, good. There are scenes from a war film. Yeah. Actually, I bet there has been a film. Oh, I've got something. I nearly missed this one out. Here's something new. I learned today from Russian sources that Putin was in 2 films, and one of them was a series, and the other one was a film. It was a film, and I've forgotten the names of them now. It's gone, but I know where to find. I know where to find the information. But I tried looking them up on the the databases and things like that, but he doesn't get a mention. But apparently at the age of 17, he appeared as a stuntman in 2 films, and anyway. There's something odd, and so Janet says Putin speaks excellent German. Yeah, well, I mean, he was there a while. Mrs. Putin said he did not beat her. Yeah, I think she changed the story though. I think there could be. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't party to this, and unfortunately, in Russia, it's seen as it's not unusual. Put it that way. I've been out with a number of Russian women, and I'd have to say I think nearly all of them complained of this. Not from me, I might add, but it's not unusual. Indeed, in Russia, it was decriminalized. Beating your wife was decriminalized about 10 years ago, something like that. And so, I mean, you can't beat them to death or put them in hospital or something, but you can physically strike your wife. Anyway, somebody might actually comment on that in more detail, because that's something that I don't actually know. I mean, if Mrs. Putin said that, but look at her situation. Suppose she tells this friend of hers, she goes to this friend of hers in tears and says that her husband's just beaten her up. This friend then goes and tells somebody else. What can she do? She's reliant on him to supply the cash to keep her and her 2 daughters. And what if he does a bunk somewhere? It's really difficult. And I mean, this is a situation, not just Mrs. Putin, it's just any woman who finds herself in this situation where there's no social security, there's no parents you can run back to, and there's indeed it is in a society where this is expected. Men are expected to sort of hit their wives. I mean, if it happened in Western Europe or here, Central Europe, then yeah, there's going to be a problem for the man. But there, so I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying that he did it. I'm just putting it in context. Hello, watch, and yeah. So he does. Brian says that Putin enjoys posing topless on a horse. I mean, it seems to me really odd. Mussolini used to do it, and Hitler said Hitler really frowned on it. And there's on YouTube you can find some Idi Amin, for example, and he's in a swimming pool, and you see him diving in the pool early morning, and you see him come out again in uniform, in his field marshal's uniform, and things like that. And because I think he says something along the lines of, but this is the way people expect to see me, not with. So that was Idi Amin. I think it looks a bit odd, to be quite honest. There is, from a health point of view, in fact, I would encourage people to actually walk around without a shirt on and all the rest of it, because the value you get from vitamin D is as long as it's not too hot, because you have to cover yourself relatively quickly. I mean, I do it when I'm by myself, but I don't do it when other people see me. Anyway, so if you won't see any pictures of me on a horse without a shirt, because I've got an allergy to horses. Right, and okay, the concealed gun. Yes, I don't think Putin carried a gun. Anyways, I think the evidence is he didn't have one at all. So, anyway, hello, Annie, um, and uh, and so, how much truth is there to the Putin is the richest man in the world idea? I'm convinced he's the richest man. No, I don't think there's any doubt in this whatsoever. You can see what's happened to all the people around him, the amount of money that they've got, the kleptocracy, the theft. If you go to Russia, I mean, if you walk around Moscow or Petersburg, it looks much the same as it does here. But if you go out into the countryside, I haven't been to Tver, where Putin's grandparents come from, but I know somebody had been. He told me. I mean, it looks as though it's in the 19th century or something like that. This is the odd thing about this, is that the people who have suffered the most because of Putin are his biggest supporters. The poor, the dispossessed. It is the people who can afford to go to university. They're the people who've got money to be able to do it. Things like this. They're not Putin supporters. So the Navalny film, for example, if you look at this palace he's built himself, he's had built for himself, was it 2 billion euros or dollars or whatever? It's incredible. That's huge amounts of cash. I mean, 2 billion. I can't. I looked up some time ago what the most expensive building was in the world. It wasn't that. I can't remember what it was now. But this is astronomical money, and it's not raised as money normally is in real estate projects. It's his own private money. The thing is now, according to Bill Browder and others, that the money is held in trust by oligarchs. So the oligarchs get the cash, and Putin's bit is kept in a separate account somewhere, or using some funny name. It's not kept in Russia, of course. It's sent out. It'll be in London or in Geneva or in New York, or more likely the Cayman Islands or something like that. So that's where the cash stolen from the Russian people actually goes, which leaves us to the question: why did he want to risk it all? Well, but I also asked about Hitler as well. Hitler had a lovely house up that mountain, and he lost it all. What do I think of the rumor of Putin's health? No, I don't believe it at all. I think his health is perfectly. I think there's nothing wrong with his health. Putin has lived a life, on the whole, which most of us should do. He's clearly into physical exercise in a big way. He took up playing hockey when he was about 59 or something. Look at him. Maybe the weights he's pulling in the gym aren't particularly heavy or anything like that, but he's doing it. And how many others of us are doing things like that when we should be doing it? So from that point of view, I do appreciate that sometimes people who are super healthy die. I mean, I do appreciate that. But I would find this very hard to believe. Now, what will get Putin? And I do think I can see differences from the photographs, which are now, and compare it to even 2-3 years ago. And this is the situation he's now got himself into, and with this war. During the Shigozhin revolt, or whatever, march on excursion to Moscow, he disappeared. And can you imagine the panic, the fear that he must have found himself in then? Because what he has lost. So, or not everything, of course, but he's lost a large amount of it. As long as these sanctions are in, if the oligarchs are holding money for him in trust, That money has now been blocked. I'm sure they can get it out of wherever it is, uh, in New York or wherever. I'm sure they've thought of these things. Putting sanctions on people. It would probably work for likes of us, because then we'd be stuck. We don't know how to get our money. These people are professionals. They're doing it all the time. They've been criminals for such a long time. They know what they're doing. So. I've got no doubt that he'd get some of his money. But what he could have done was he could have stood down, enjoyed his life, while he's still healthy and good, and he could have been a hero in Russia for what he'd done to some people, and but he lost it, and I imagine he will never get it back. I imagine. Anyway, have I come across many Nazis in Russia? What personally, do you mean, or have I come across? Look, the thing is, yes, I have come across Russian Nazis. In fact, I even came across one in Berlin last month. The idiot was pretending to be German. I spoke to him in Russian. He responded to me in Russian. Caught him out, you see, and he was protesting something about the Ukraine war. So, but whilst pretending to be German, but maybe he'd been there for a long time. I don't know. I'm sure German people could recognize it. Personally, I've seen Nazis, and yeah, I've seen them. But I don't hang out with these type of people. So it's not really an answer. I see this on webs. You can see it on the internet. I see people write to me, but I used to have people in this country, in Poland, who were clear Nazis, and I don't hang out with Nazis. So I'd say, I don't know them personally, and I certainly wouldn't want to know them. It's not. You might think that that's I should show some interest in getting to know everybody, but there's only so much you can do, and it's quite honest. Rather than hanging out with Nazis, I'd rather watch reruns of Columbo. I would have to say this is that though the extreme right is in Russia far more than you get in other countries, and I think this is due to this Volkisch ideology, the Volkisch ideology, which I'm using the German word because I don't think there's a suitable word in English, and that is that put another light on. Does that make any difference? No. Right, just making these. This one's probably the wrong one to put on. Oh no, I should turn it around. Hey, is that all right? It's not looking any better. That's better. And it is the belief in the land, which is part of the ideology and the soul of the party, if you like. So the land itself is giving rise to a superior human form. I think that's about the best way. The word in Volkisch is often translated into English as folk. So we have things like folk dances or something like that, or folk shirts or whatever. But that's not it. That is not it, even because it sounds very similar. And it is this belief in Mother Russia that is part of this Nazi type ideology. And so, I put the video up yesterday saying, okay, the Putin, the regime today it meets, I would say, all the criteria for Nazism. It's got the belief in the ethno-nationalism. It's got the superior being, the superior race, I should say. The idea of Lebensraum, wanting to occupy others and to take the land of inferior beings. As for example, Hitler had this. Having said that, that is something which just existed in the 19th century. It was all over Britain, France. Lots of countries did it. The idea, the masculine dominated society, the militarism, the sort of the cult of death. The symbolism, the use of this Z symbol, which is clearly like a swastika, it's replaced the swastika. So in the mass meetings, So all of this shows what I would term as being Nazism. The only thing it doesn't is the anti-Semitism. Now Russia is the word pogrom comes from Russia. I think the word anti-Semitism comes from Russia. There's a deep history of anti-Semitism in Russia. If you'd wanted to join the KGB and a few years before Putin, if you were Jewish or you were from the Caucasus or you were just about any other ethnic minority in Soviet Union, you wouldn't be able to. It was only they started changing this in the 80s and trying to get people from different backgrounds into their organization. Mind you, I need to point out as well, to be in all fairness, is probably an unfair comparison, but when the American justice system tried to infiltrate the mafia, they couldn't do it because the FBI agents in the 30s and 40s were all Anglo-Saxon type people. They couldn't find anybody who was Italian to do it, to infiltrate. So a similar sort of situation existed there. Don't know. Moment. Okay, is Putin related to Rasputin? Good one. Yeah. Why would anyone want France back? Yeah, that's a good point, Brian. Yeah, I thought this was going to be a porno episode. Says Apki. Sorry. Oh, sorry, yeah. It was a slight spelling mistake there, Apki. I thought this was going to be a porno episode, Origins of Putin and all. Yeah, right. Yeah, you can work that one out. How popular is Putin in Russia really? I think he is popular. I really believe that he's as popular as any Western leader is in their own country. That's what I believe. I mean, people I know don't like him, but there are, again, it's who you tend to mix with. Now, I am not mixing with the factory workers in Chita or in Krasnoyarsk or something like that. People I know tend to be intellectual people from Moscow, from Petersburg, and so that is really a poor indication. Not only that, I no longer discuss politics with anybody I know in Russia at all, for obvious reason, except for those who are in the. I mean, last year was still possible for people could travel, but I don't think I'll be seeing any Russians around who've travelled out this year, and But I do believe that Putin is now. The thing is this. If he stood for an election, would he win? And the answer to that is, well, possibly. I mean, I would say he had the problem is this: there are neutral organizations which do polling still in Russia. But if somebody rings you up and asks you the question, how happy are you with Putin? What would you say? Be realistic. I mean, somebody rang me up on a polling organization a couple of days ago. I told them what I thought. But if somebody rang me up in Russia, no way would I tell the truth. I say, no, it's great. One would have to assume that they are listening to conversations like that. Now, I do appreciate, they can't listen to all the conversations, everybody, every time, and I don't know how it works with conversation control, but I assume that it works. Like some key words, it might say, I just met Osama bin Laden down the pub last night, or something like that, and then bang, they're onto you because they've got that keyword. But I don't know how it works anyway. But in a case like polling organizations, polls are done on a basis of maybe a few hundred people as a rule, and so you just any political poll, you can see what they publish their base and how many people are there and what they did and all the rest of it. So it's normally only a few. That's easy to actually control, and in that way they could find out who people who doesn't like. And of course, I mean, it's not a problem not liking Putin. That is not the problem. Of course, it's a problem when people do something about it. So that also needs to be borne in mind. But they could interpret saying something to a polling organization as being doing something about it. Even Nazis Nazi Germany, not Nazis in Russia, but the Nazi Germany, they put up with opposition to a certain extent that they knew who the previous party bosses and things like this had been, people who were in the Social Democratic Party or maybe local councillors. They didn't get arrested. They were arrested in the first initial waves, but then they released them, and then it was like, right now, behave yourself. They didn't sort of do them in or anything. In August of 1944, there was something called Operation Grid, when they started arresting absolutely everybody. But that only happened then, and that was in the aftermath of the bomb plot. If you look at some of the people, even in the attempted coup against Hitler, there, for example, Goerdeler and others, I mean, Goerdeler had shown absolutely openly his opposition to Hitler when he'd been mayor of Leipzig, and but he was still free afterwards. So I think it's the same in Russia today. It's that, I mean, you're not, as long as you don't stand with a blank piece of paper in your hand in the street, as long as you take your problems home and keep them at home, then you'll probably be all right. The problem is this, though: if people don't, men above all, they don't protest, they don't resist, then they could end up getting killed in Ukraine. And anyway, so right, Bill Browder's book is a good read. Yes, I had a sort of a similar background. Well, similar background. That's not quite true. Yeah, it's very similar to him, because I thought, why didn't I have his success in life? And having said that, I mean, he's a similar age to me, but his lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, who was murdered in a horrendous way. I mean, having that in your conscience, I mean, you might be a multi-millionaire, but you've got something like that. I don't think I could actually stand it. I mean, I think of myself as quite a weak person or something like that. But if somebody lost their life, for me, well, I wouldn't say it was for him, but he was defending the Russian justice system effectively, and the way they killed him, utterly horrendous. And anyway, so Brian wants to know where the cash is. He couldn't have it. No, Bill Browder reckons it's, and so other people have said the same thing. Actually, it's not just Bill. It's held in trust by his mates. And this, of course, is a bit of a problem, because if you give your mates money, they mightn't have it when they come back to you. Now, in 2 days' time, I'm going to talk about the Great Train Robbery, which, of course, will be the 60th anniversary. And this isn't a spoiler alert, because I'm not going to go into what happened to the money, but there were people they give the money to other people to look after, and they sort of looked after it. I think there's only one of them who actually gave it to somebody to look after, and he got it back. He got as much back as he gave him. So it's not always a good idea, if you're a criminal, giving your cash to someone else to actually look after. On the other hand, if you're a big oligarch, and say Putin's overthrown or he retires or something like that, and he has to go and live in North Korea, I think really, if you're holding a few shekels for him, then you ought to give it up, because he's noted for bumping people off, and even in his old age, in the retirement home, in the Pyongyang retirement home for senior Nazis, then there could be the risk that somebody bumps him off. So okay, they say you can't retire from the mafia. Well, there were a couple of big people who did retire from the mafia, but I think his money is relatively safe. I imagine. I don't know, of course. Anyway, yeah. Right, the greatest, catching him out by speaking Russian, but it was an automatic reaction actually to me when I I think about um, right. Lee writes, it's due to a conflict between people from the Caucasus in conflicting with those who believe that they are ethnic Russians. Yeah, the thing when the Soviet Union broke up, now all colonial countries, every single one, sent people from the colonial country out to other places. My uncle was out in India, I think that was when he was in his army days. But so there was people. My mother worked in a shop as a sales girl, and she said that the people who from the colonial service, they were dreadfully arrogant with them even, and because sort of jumped up and really unpleasant. Now, the thing was though, in take the British Empire, most countries sort of the people actually sort of the ex-colonial sort of returned. I mean, it depends where. I mean, Australia and Canada maybe they didn't. South Africa really didn't either. But if you look at people, the white population of Kenya for something like that, not many stayed, and so they returned. And the thing with Russia is that there were colonials all over the place. Now, friends of mine from Moscow, for example, they lived in Tashkent, and they were born in Tashkent. I went to the Uzbek restaurant with them, for example, in Moscow, one of my favorite places. And why they left after the breakup of the Soviet Union. So you get that lots of people, I mean, lots of people, I just use that as one example, but I know lots of people were born all over the Soviet Union. The ethnic Russian population of Kazakhstan, if I remember correctly, was about 45%, something ridiculous like that, 40%, and now it's only 9%. You can even look at as maps, demographic maps, and there's sort of just like one small area now where there's any sizable Russian population. They left because it was all right being the ethnic majority, but they didn't want to be the ethnic minority as such. So this has created all sorts of problems. Now, the Caucasus, which was occupied by the Russian Empire at the end, the beginning of the 19th century, and so then it was followed by colonization by these colonists who came from the Russian heartlands, and they either stayed or didn't know what to do. So in the Caucasus, there are places where, but because it was geographically, so to speak, part of Russia, it wasn't one of these allegedly independent states of the Soviet Union, which could leave the Union anytime it pleased. Then these people actually stayed there, and that's why you get a situation that they actually hung on. Why didn't they just pull out of Chechnya? And for example, why bother? Because it was within the borders of Russia, so that was why. Whereas, for example, in other places, they just pulled out of without any problems, of like the stands or the Caucasian Azerbaijan or Armenia or Georgia. Okay, Georgia was the first one to leave the Soviet Union, but I think, or maybe it was Lithuania, I can't remember, but anyway, it was one of the first. And anyway, good. Yeah, I thought they were all fans of World War II movies, says Apki. The New Tsar, The Rise and Reign of Vladimir Putin was a good read too. Yeah, that is brilliant. That is, in my opinion, one of the best books. There is another book called Anne Garrel, I think. Oh, I've forgotten the name now. Putin's. She went to places in deep inside Russia, and she went around talking to people. And Anne Garrel, I think. I've forgotten the name of the book though. How annoying. And anyway, to me, this insight into the support for Putin, and despite this terrible corruption and crime which she describes is, I mean, it's a really depressing book, actually. But from the point of view, the insight into it is in my opinion absolutely brilliant. Artificial intelligence now. Yeah. Is there any kind of succession plan, or was there before the war? Problem with having there is a problem having succession plans, because sometimes if you're a dictator, that the successor decides it's time's up. I mean, look at the succession plan that Tony Blair had, and I wouldn't call Gordon Brown the sort of person to want to get rid of him. There are a number of historical precedents in various countries where their successor has been chosen, and the successor turns out to be a bad choice. It was thought maybe Medvedev was supposed to be the successor, but Medvedev was caught up in some alleged corruption scandal, which I don't think was. I think Putin didn't like Medvedev because he was too moderate, and he was the sort of person he suggested we're going to have a look at the election fraud. And so as far as Putin was concerned, you don't look at election fraud, you just do it. And having said that, Medvedev has now gone completely over to he's gone full scale doomsday, and he's in favor of nuclear. Sorry, I've got an allergy, but it's been very, very light this year. So thanks to these pills I've taken. Yeah, I'll just do a quick mention, quick plug for the pills. There we go. Rupafin worked wonders for me. Anyway, all right, there's a word from the sponsor. Blind says, I've always wanted to see Vladivostok, a city in Russia that's basically in Japan. It's always intrigued me. Yeah, but I think Vladivostok, I suspect this would look like many other places in Russia. I've been there, I don't know, I've never. Lisa's, when I mentioned the conflict between the Russians and those from the Caucasus, sorry, I can't see the whole thing because of the little, I was referring to one of the source of Nazis in Russia. Ah, yes, yeah. It would be, the Chechens, they I didn't really think of the Chechens as being the Nazis, actually, but I don't know. Do they? But there's a lot about the current Chechen leadership. Given the Hitler salute, for example, and that type of thing. One, of course, has to be careful, because I'm sure somebody could find a photograph of me sort of pointing at something and then saying it's a Hitler salute. But yeah, I don't know. That's a good one. Okay, right. So thanks very much. Now tomorrow I'm thinking, I haven't made my mind. So day after tomorrow I'm going to do the Great Train Robbery. I actually planned the Great Train Robbery. I was in London. I went to the there was something I heard somewhere, and I thought that doesn't make any sense. This is how I get into things. I hear something, that doesn't make any sense. And then I start trying to investigate it further. So I have an opinion which is completely different to anything else. No, I won't say it's completely different than anything else you'll hear. I have an opinion of the Great Train Robbery, which is absolutely non-standard. And anyway, we'll come on to that. I'm a bit worried that there'll be other people who know more about it than I do. But anyway, so I'll do that the night of next. I think I might do Eva Braun tomorrow. And I think that Eva Braun, despite what Albert Speer said about her, I think she's a very interesting person. And I think there's a lot of things that to talk about, and particularly what can happen in relationships. And her problem was, though, she picked one of the most evil people who ever lived to be in a relationship with. So anyway, that'll be tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching, and all the best for me. I've got a video on the other channel I've got as well in a couple of minutes, so I'll have to go to that. But thank you, and bye for now.